If we're moving on to the UltIMMA trials,
Let's move on to that. UltIMMA.
I'll take that. I mean, it was a very interesting trial design in that they also abandoned PASI 75 completely. They didn't even talk about it. In this clinical trial design, a patient getting to PASI 89% improvement is completely a failure. At 16 weeks.
Isn't that incredible?
That's incredible, right? So about 3/4 of the patients or so got to PASI 90, close to that got to IGA of 0.01. So really great data. But what I think is really important coming out of those data points is that out to 1 year, the PASI 100 continues creeping up to the point that at 52 weeks, the PASI 100 clearance is over 50%, which is really very unique among all of our agents. And that I think is a very objective endpoint. You will be clear of psoriasis. So that agent, I think, has that advantage. But also, what's interesting, if you break down the trial data of looking at UltIMMA, the comparator with ustekinumab, there's an interesting plot that they show, which is looking at different patient demographic characteristics at trial entry, looking at weight classes, looking at previous exposure to biologics, biologic failures. And if you look at ustekinumab, it kind of seems a little fickle because it jumps around depending on what the patient characteristics are. But if you look at risankizumab, this medication doesn't care what you've been on, doesn't care if you failed anything, it doesn't care what weight you are.
And it also doesn't seem to lose efficacy towards that 12-week mark. When they put the two graphs of ustekinumab and risankizumab next to each other, you saw a little sawtoothing effect of the ustekinumab as patients were getting closer to the 12-week mark. They were losing some of the efficacy. So they, within the 12 weeks dosing schedule, they did better in between the 12 weeks than they did at week 12, as opposed to risankizumab, where patients were, rock steady the whole
And
way.
we clearly see that in clinical practice with ustekinumab. I mean, that is a drug in my camp. I have many patients still on drug, and I have many that are dosed at every 8 weeks.
Yeah, I remember we would actually kind of try to figure out when the insurance company would pay for another syringe. So I found that most of them pay at around 72 to 75 days. So you can actually, without even trying to fight for it, get it a little more frequently. And that actually shows up in the long-term data for ustekinumab, which looks really good, but the investigators are actually allowed to change the dosing regimen and frequency if they wanted to.
I believe in Phoenix 2, it was Phoenix 2, there was an arm that actually patients did that were not responders. They were between PASI 50 and PASI 74, and so some of those patients were randomized to an every 8-week arm too. So there is some justification and they did better.
The 40, I think the 90 milligram group did better.
Right.
So yeah, but I think that is some justification there.
So, if any of you have tried that with current insurers, at least in my area, we've tried to take, for example, guselkumab in the few patients in whom it's not working well, and give it every 7 or every 6 weeks. They will not let me do it. So the only option you have is to throw in samples. It's interesting that we're so almost blasé about giving more drug because these drugs are so safe. I'll just say, look at the package insert for secukinumab, Cosentyx. We've had a couple of patients sent to us who were given, it's 2 injections a week for 5 weeks. It's done once a week. We had twice, and we've written up one of them. Patient took it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
And Saturday, clear.
Right. and the dermatologist called me up and was really nervous. And I said, don't worry, be happy. Your patient's going to really get a good, quick response. In the package insert for secukinumab, they've dosed as high as 10 times the maximum human, the approved human dose. And it's in the package insert. There are also over 100 cases of overdose with that drug, and there are no adverse events of note.
And I want to add that there are probably thousands of cases of overdose with ustekinumab-treated patients, because for Crohn's disease, it's given at much higher doses than psoriasis patients. And so, I think we all are more comforted by that dosing schedule for Crohn's disease in treating our psoriasis patients.
Yeah, it actually brings us to the safety of blocking IL-23 and IL-17, because it appears that that pathway, people born IL-17 deficient get yeast infections. They get chronic mucocutaneous candidiasis. They get tinea infections and yeast infections. With IL-23, so I'm not aware of people who are born just deficient in IL-23, but IL-12/23, P40 deficient people get 2 infections. They get salmonella infections And I don't believe there's a single patient on any of these drugs that has gotten a salmonella infection. And the other infection they get is mycobacterial infections. In fact, many of them are discovered when at birth they're given BCG, which is a live mycobacterium. And in those patients, the BCG disseminates. And there actually been patients very ill from BCG vaccination when they're deficient in P40. Well, we're not blocking IL-12, but we are blocking IL-23. And so that's why probably in the package insert, we have this caution about tuberculosis, even though in practice and in the clinical trials, reactivation of latent TB has not been a problem.